Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are loaded and going to have a lot of fun today. Later on, we'll preview this afternoon's announcement by four-star linebacker Adam Anderson as he gets ready to make his college choice. Will it be good news for the Dogs? Well, I'll share my opinion on that. We'll also welcome in Seth Emerson to DawgNation Daily today and talk to him about the bye week preparations for Georgia, getting ready for Florida next Saturday. And speaking of the Gators, those lousy, sneaking Gators, we're going to start the show with what I think is a really interesting conversation. Two very different opinions about the proper approach for Georgia going into next Saturday. Which one is right? Well, I'll let you decide as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I love a great sports debate, and one of my favorite things is when I really feel strongly about an opinion. I like to back up my opinion and tell you why I think that I'm right, and I don't mind if I get proven wrong, and I don't mind if you disagree, but there's something fun about that debate that sports fans are able to have with each other. However, there's also at times, I think, another kind of debate that can be really fun. Sometimes you believe you're absolutely right and you only see your side of the story and you argue tooth and nail with somebody about the other perspective. But there's also occasionally that moment when you hear two arguments and they frankly both sound like they make a lot of sense, and which one is more right than the other is a little more difficult to decide. I'm going to begin DawgNation Daily today with an example of the latter, an example of a really well-framed argument from two really smart people with really strong credentials, and they are very different points of view, but they are both, I guess, potentially right, and which of these things you think is more right probably depends on, I guess, your own frame of mind here. Let me lay it out this way. Georgia goes into Florida next Saturday to Jacksonville to take on the Gators. Now, we all know the history here. Recently, Georgia's lost. Over the long term, last few decades, Georgia's lost. And it leads to a question that's probably worth answering here of how much should the past matter in these games? The losing streak that Georgia's currently on, the disappointments of good teams that, for whatever reason, could not get it done against Florida. How much should the past matter here? Is that something that should be framed to give Georgia an extra edge against Florida? Or is that something that should be kind of disregarded, almost ignored, to kind of keep Georgia in the same frame of mind it's been for every other game this season? Well, yesterday on DawgNation Daily, I had two guys that have some expertise when it comes to stuff like this. Mike Johnson, who won a national championship at Alabama and was a part of the transition of that program from Nick Saban's first year in 2007, that would have been Mike's second year in the program, to Nick Saban's first national championship at Alabama in 2009. Mike also saw the transition of a long losing streak for his team Alabama against Auburn. Auburn won 6 straight against Alabama at one point. But Mike was on the team that sort of saw that start to change when Alabama started to build its own streak against Auburn. He weighed in on the subject of how Georgia should approach Florida based on how his teams approached Auburn. Somebody else on the show yesterday was former Georgia quarterback David Green, who got a win against Florida in 2004, but also lived through the heartbreak of a 2002 team that could have won the national championship had it beaten Florida, and a 2003 team that was good enough to win the East, but for whatever reason just could not get it done against Florida there that season. And what David said on DawgNation Daily yesterday was, if he was the coach of Georgia, he would treat the game against the Gators just like any other game because of what he saw his teams go through in 2001 and 2002 and 2003. Here's how David said it yesterday.
Look, I think you just treat it like any other game. You obviously admit that the atmosphere is going to be different, because it is. Just like the SEC championship game, it has a different feel, and you're fooling yourself if you think it doesn't, because you can definitely feel it. But I don't know, if I'm a coach, the one thing I want from my players, I want them thinking about the things that they can control. They can't worry about the years that I lost at Georgia. We came home with our tails tucked between our legs. They had nothing to do with that. They need to be extra zoomed in, as I like to call it, just zoomed in on their assignment. They're there to play a football game, and a team that executes the best, that performs the best, doesn't kill themselves, will end up winning. And we've certainly got the team and the talent to go down there and take care of business this year. They just got to go out and play the kind of ball with the same mindset they have, at the beginning of this season.
Now listen, when David Green says that makes all the sense in the world to me. That sounds exactly like a really good approach for Georgia to take against Florida next Saturday. But Mike Johnson, who, as I said, kind of lived through some losses to Auburn and Alabama and then saw his team start to clobber the Tigers, he says that he believes that Kirby Smart's going to take a different approach. Here's what Mike said.
I don't know what Kirby's going to say to the media, but behind those closed doors, I guarantee you he is pointing out to these players how big of a deal this game is and how 20, 30 years later he remembers his game against Florida, and he remembers every single play, and he remembers every single tackle. I promise you he's telling those stories. It's something that I would do if I were in his shoes, and having heard Kirby Smart talk to these defenses he had at Alabama for so many years, and I know that it's something that's coming off his tongue right now because that's just the way it is. And I think as a player, really the toughest thing is trying to find a balance, not trying to play too crazy. Don't do anything that you wouldn't normally do to any other team. Just find that extra level of emotion. I definitely had issues in 2007 was my first start against Auburn. And listen, man, I wanted to hit everything that had orange on. I was flying around the field, cut blocking, hitting people. I mean, I had to kind of restrain my emotions. And I know that Kirby Smart will tell them to do that, but I promise you he's pointing to these guys and he's telling them stories back from when he was there. And he's probably telling them just to make sure they leave it all out on the field.
So almost an exact opposite opinion of what David Green expressed. When I hear Mike Johnson say that, he sounds just as right to me as David Green did a moment ago. David Green says, hey, you treat the game like any other game. You want to keep the same mindset you've had all season long. Mike Johnson says that he thinks Kirby Smart's going to say, you're going to remember this game for the next 30 or 40 years. You better go out there and play like it. So when you tell this story to your grandkids, you can tell them the story of how hard you tried. When Mike Johnson says that, that sounds like it makes a lot of sense too. But to go back to David Green for a moment, he says there's just one problem with making too much out of the game. All of a sudden, you can't get as focused on the Saturday as you need to. Here's David again.
You know, it's a unique game. It's one of those ones that's fun to play. The atmosphere is crazy. I remember coming into those games, and we had played so bad down there for so long. I think we actually ran into a Brandon where we just wanted it so bad that a lot of times we had just a hard time either getting into the flow of the game or getting into the rhythm of the game. And we had a few opportunities to make plays. We didn't make them. It had nothing to do with us, not wanting it bad enough. It's just our execution was off.
So that's why David Green says you got to be careful making too much out of this game because as a guy who's played in the Georgia-Florida game, both on the winning side and unfortunately coming up short, he knows the amount of desire and the heart and the intensity that Georgia players play this game with, and you got to be careful not to take that emotion to too much of a fever pitch because maybe it makes you a little less focused, maybe it makes you a little less likely to kind of go out there and execute. However, Mike Johnson on the show yesterday also said that his experience in college football was a little different than that. In his first season with Nick Saban in 2007, Mike got his second consecutive loss against Auburn. And all that team, because they had Saban, thought they were going to win the 2007 game, and then they didn't. And what Mike Johnson said, and this is a really interesting perspective here on Nick Saban from a guy that can only share this if he's been in the locker room with Nick Saban. Mike Johnson said that he saw a change in Saban after the loss to Auburn. And what Saban experienced in that time with the Alabama Crimson Tide may be similar to what Kirby Smart has gone through at Georgia. Here's Mike again.
That was Nick Saban's first taste of the rivalry, really. So I don't think he understood it. Throughout the week, he kind of explained it to us like, hey, guys, this rivalry means a lot to a lot of people in this state. And it was so funny because when you come back in 2008 and Nick Saban had tasted a little bit of loss on that side of the rivalry, it was almost like he was more irritated. He was like, hey, this game means a lot to everybody in this locker room now. This game, this is a big deal for this football team and for this university and for this athletic department. It was almost like getting a taste of that loss the year before to Tommy Tuberville and company really amped him up to try to go out on a ledge and really develop that team in a way to kind of put Auburn behind us. I think it's different for Kirby Smart. Obviously, he's been a part of that rivalry, so he understands that and maybe a little bit better than most people that are coming from the outside in. And I think that you try to play into the player's psyche when you talk about these rivalry games.
So you'll have to decide for yourself which guy you think is more right than the other. Mike Johnson, who says you do make a big deal about the game because you tell the players just how much it means to beat your rival. David Green saying, you know what, you treat it more like any other game so that way you don't get too intense. You don't go out there and try too hard because trying too hard makes you less than your best. I think both guys have incredible credentials. I think both guys make really good points on that. Here's what I think we all can agree with, though. No matter which side of the David Green, Mike Johnson side of the discussion you're on, here's something we all can agree on. The games that Georgia has lost in the past don't make Georgia more likely to lose next Saturday. That's just an objective fact, right? However, Georgia's current losing streak and history of losing games against Florida is almost a story too big to ignore. But the good news for me is I think Kirby Smart, who is kind of showing himself to maybe be a master motivator here at Georgia in his second season, can spin this to his advantage. Let me give you a quick example here. Think back to the Notre Dame game. Think back to the edge that Georgia players seem to have going into South Bend. Remember what Dominic Sanders said that week, what Jonathan Ledbetter said that week about going out there and punishing them from the start? that team seemed to relish the opportunity to be an underdog against the Irish, and they seem to kind of go out and play more motivated because of it. Now, from the Las Vegas online sportsbook perspective, Georgia's going to be a big favorite against Florida next Saturday. But the Georgia players don't necessarily have to know that. Kirby Smart can say to them, because Georgia teams have lost this game so much in the past, people think you're going to go out and lose. People are doubting you and expecting you to kind of fall short as well. Can you imagine the way that Kirby Smart might be able to spin that to his advantage next week? And right now, over the course of these next 2 weeks in practice, can you imagine this Georgia team that's been so focused for every single game thus far this season being even more focused for next Saturday against the Gators, even more motivated to kind of go out there and right the wrongs of this rivalry? That puts a smile on my face just thinking about it. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm glad you're with us today. Whether you're watching us on video, of course, we're there for you at 10 a.m. each and every Monday through Friday on the DawgNation Facebook page, or on the radio at noon every day on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And in podcast form, we'll post the show for you at the world-famous DawgNation.com, on iTunes, SoundCloud, anywhere podcasts are found. We appreciate you finding DawgNation Daily. And boy, when we started our Gator Hater Countdown a year ago, you didn't ever really feel like you'd ever get to this day, but we are now just 9 days away from the rivalry game for Georgia that matters more than any other, our DawgNation Daily Gator Hater Countdown. We're looking forward to being in Jacksonville. We're calling it our DawgNation Invasion to Jacksonville. We've got a huge tailgate set up for you that day. It's going to be in the touchdown lot. It's the tailgaters parking touchdown lot. It's going to be right near Gate 6 off Bryan Street. We're going to start at 10 a.m. there that day. We'll have a bunch of tailgate TVs set up. Jeff Santel and I will be watching games with you there. We're going to have our Dixie Vodka Tasting Lounge that day for you for our DawgNation Invasion tailgate to Jacksonville. Of course, you've got to be 21 or older to get into the Dixie Vodka Tasting Lounge, but you already know that. And we are going to have, while supplies last, brand new red Gator Hater t-shirts that we're going to give away that day. They are awesome. They're specially designed DawgNation Invasion t-shirts with the Gator Hater license plate on the front in red. It is going to be really cool. And, of course, it's brought to you in part by one of our sponsors, Dixie Vodka, the South's best tasting vodka. Now, by the way, speaking of the DawgNation Invasion, speaking of being in Jacksonville next Saturday, as a precursor to all that, we'll also be at Marlowe's in Brookhaven on Tuesday for our DawgNation Invasion big game preview. That's 6 to 8 p.m., 3575 Dirt and Drive in Atlanta. Marlowe's in Brookhaven for that. Jeff Santel and I are going to be there. We're looking forward to hopefully seeing you for that as well as we get ready to talk about how the Dogs are going to beat those nasty, stinking Gators. All right, I'm going to let you hear from David Green on one more point here in just a moment, and we'll hear from Seth Emerson as well. Before that, speaking of the Gator Hater Countdown and getting ready for the showdown against Florida in the cocktail party, we've been doing our Gator Hater roll call here every day on DawgNation Daily. Thanks to all of you who are reaching out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily with your own examples of how much of a Gator Hater you are. Some of you are sending in DawgNation Daily Gator Hater t-shirt pics. Others of you are sending your own paraphernalia in. We really appreciate you doing that. I will tell you that I'm running behind right now as far as getting all these on the air, both in podcast form and on the video. But we're going to keep showing them all as we get them in every day to let DawgNation know that there's a bunch of Gator haters in this fan base and a bunch of folks ready for the game next Saturday. So let me give a few shout-outs here right now. We're going to start with Bonnie Watson, who has a great Gator hater logo that she's made of a alligator with its mouth tied together with a rope. Bonnie, I love that one. Appreciate you sending that one in. We've also got a few more here. How about Tyler Herring? He says he's got this poster with him everywhere he goes. It's basically a hairy dog-looking Georgia Bulldog choking a gator with one hand around the neck. Tyler, that's a great pick. Appreciate you sending that in. Randy Griffin sent in a cool video. Now, you won't be able to see this if you're watching video. This is just a picture. But he's essentially got a bobblehead doll of Larry Munson doing the call from the 1980 Georgia-Florida game with a bulldog doing its business on top of a gator. Really good stuff from Randy Griffin on that. We appreciate that. Our buddy Bassin Dog sent in this great compilation of a bunch of Florida fans wearing their jean shorts. Bassin is always really funny on Twitter. That's another example from him. Really good stuff. And then Jonger81 on Twitter sent a picture of him kind of taking care of a gator. He's on a putt-putt course, beating one up. It looks to be giving a diamond cutter to another gator statue. So really good stuff from Jonger81 on Twitter as well. So keep sending those examples of your own degree of gator hater credentials, and we'll share those here with you on DawgNation Daily. By the way, some of you have sent some in that are too profane for me to share on the show, but even if I can't share it on our family-friendly show, I certainly appreciate your passion for the Georgia-Florida rivalry. We will get Seth Emerson here in just a moment. Before that, as I said, I want to play you one more clip from David Green, because in the midst of talking about what he said yesterday about the Florida rivalry, I thought David used a word that's so appropriate for this series, for this game, especially Georgia this year. Listen to the word that he describes the Florida victory as being, how it felt to him. Here's David again.
That win my senior year, it was probably just more of satisfaction than anything. There's no question we probably should have beat them in years prior to that, and obviously it cost us a chance at playing in the national championship game in '02.
Yeah, so good stuff there from David Green, saying that the Florida rivalry was for him a satisfying experience, something that and you know what the word satisfying means here, right? I mean, if we eat a bowl of ice cream, that makes us happy, but if we go to the gym or go on a long run or work out, that makes us satisfied. And there's an element of that that's true for the Georgia-Florida game as well. There are other games later on this year that may make Georgia fans happy, an SEC championship, a national championship. But right now it's about being satisfied. It's about doing something you should have done before and doing it emphatically maybe in 2017. So I think when David Green used the word satisfying, it's really the perfect description of exactly the way the Georgia fans are going to feel maybe next Saturday. We'll certainly see how that plays out. We appreciate you being with us here today on DawgNation Daily. Hope you enjoy Seth Emerson right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
Spent some time here with Seth Emerson on DawgNation Daily. Great coverage from him of UGA practice this week. Of course, no game on Saturday, but Georgia trying to get healthy and trying to get ready to go, and Seth has certainly been all over that. And Seth, if you don't mind, let me start with a question about the Florida game next Saturday and a conversation we were just having. We heard from a couple of smart football guys on yesterday's show about how you approach the Florida game. One guy says, you know what, you do use the losses in the past as extra motivation. Another guy says, hey, you treat this just like any other game. You don't want to get too hyped up, too amped up from the game. That's based on his experiences from the past. If you were a Georgia coach, or if you had to guess about how Kirby Smart will handle this, what is the proper approach? Ignore the past, try to use the past as motivation against Florida next week?
Tend to just say, do what you've been doing, because not only is what they're doing working motivational-wise, which is just kind of, it's hokey, the old, one game at a time, 1 week at a time thing, making practice harder than games, whatever, but, that's working. And, they've also gone into this situation before, really, where they've played what was supposed to be a road game, but ended up being like about a 50-50 crowd split at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So I don't know that anything about this is going to be unusual. I'm not sure Kirby needs to say anything to the team, or the coaches need to say anything to the players. I think you just have you have a lot of seniors on this team. You have a lot of juniors who have started a few games in Jacksonville, and they can talk to them about it. Georgia just needs to not to keep throwing out cliches, but keep its foot to the pedal and just keep going, because they're about to play a Florida team that they're more talented than, and that, seems to be, with everything that's been going on with them, seems to be reeling a little bit.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't really talk much about the past and obsess over it, but, you don't want to ignore it. But I just do it saying, here we go.
Sure.
Jacksonville, Florida again. How can we mess this up?
Along those lines, after the game against Missouri on Saturday, Kirby Smart had a really interesting description about how, it's hard to run in the SEC, but they're going to keep trying, and his phrase, of course, keep chopping wood, and hopefully that pays off in the third and fourth quarter. Given that as being kind of Kirby Smart's stated philosophy, we've seen examples of that from Georgia this season. If you go into next Saturday against Florida, if you're Georgia, Florida is pretty good along the defensive line. And if Georgia's trying to establish that run in the first and second quarter, it may not have as much success early on, because the one place where Florida still has talent is up front with that defensive line, I believe. And maybe, Seth, this sets up a scenario where this game stays tense a little longer than some Georgia fans expect, some Georgia fans want. Even if it turns into a comfortable lead in the fourth quarter, maybe Florida good enough to at least challenge Georgia with what it wants to do early in the game. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I could see it like the Missouri game without the complete pull away because of Missouri's defense being just as bad as it was. I could see this as kind of even a 28-20 type of game where Georgia doesn't cover the spread, that kind of thing. But, Florida's going to be a more physical team. Georgia's a team that the Missouri game accepted, and the Tennessee and Vanderbilt games lately. Georgia's still, I think, going to be the identity of a team that is going to run the ball on offense and use that to set up the pass. and is going to ride its defense. And I don't think that's going to change. I think you'll maybe see that revert to form against Florida, and you'll have one of those more tight games rather than the 45-14 type we've been seeing lately.
So Derek Mason's on the SEC coaches teleconference yesterday, and he's asked to compare Alabama and Georgia, two teams that he's played and lost to this season. He was more than willing to kind of take on that media question. I guess some coaches may would have ducked that or tried to go in a different direction, but he said he thought Alabama was better. He referenced the Georgia secondary, and I mean, there is an element of that is true, right? I mean, no matter how Georgia compares to Alabama at the end of the season, I mean, Mason does kind of key in on the thing that you and I have certainly talked about plenty, and other fans have weighed in on, that the thing that could hold Georgia back from its championship hopes by the end of the season is that secondary, which was kind of put on display a little bit on Saturday. I mean, so on the basis of what Mason says, it's not wrong, right?
Right. I mean, I think I've been saying that all along. I've said that, and not just me, but when I talked to David Pollock way back in the preseason, he mentioned the secondary and the pass rush as concerns beyond the obvious concerns that people had about the team, which was special teams, offensive line, and at that point, whether Jacob Eason would take the next step, and receivers. Now, a lot of those questions have been answered. Special teams is better. Offensive line, we'll still see. But, they've obviously, they've settled on the starting five, and they're blocking much better than last year. Receivers, with Kerry Godwin out there, again, much like the offensive line, still a little bit of a question mark, but they've played well, and Jake Fromm is playing the way he's playing. But you're still sitting out there saying, well, what about the secondary? And also, what about the pass rush? Because it hasn't been up to par the last couple games. And Kirby Smart said that, and Davin Bellamy said that when we talked to him Tuesday. I'm going to have a story, I think, running this weekend, Saturday, with their comments in it. And those two go hand in hand. The problem for Georgia's secondary, but it's really a problem for any secondary. I don't think even Alabama's secondary, if you give the quarterback time to throw, they're not going to be able to stay with these guys forever. But Georgia's secondary has guys like, for instance, Dominic Sanders. I think he's a hell of a player. He's a great ball hawk. But he's not a perfect player, and he'll give up a pass here and there. 4 out of the 5 essential starters in the secondary against Missouri gave up a big play. On those 63-yarders, it was Dominic Sanders and Tyreek McGee on one play where guy runs by Tyreek McGee and Dominic Sanders doesn't get there in time. And then on the other 63-yarder, it was the two guys on the other side. It was Aaron Davis and then J.R. Reed. Well, the one guy who didn't give up something was DeAndre Baker, had a really good game. But that kind of exemplifies that, yeah, they've still got questions there, and that's something that may not get answered until, I don't know, I mean, we'll see how Auburn is doing, whether it's first half Auburn or second half Auburn that shows up for that game, but maybe it's the Alabama game that it really gets tested. Georgia has probably, for good news for them, faced the best passing attack they're going to see in the regular season in Missouri. But they're going to have to put up, they're going to have to do better than that in the future because their offense isn't going to be facing Missouri's defense from now on. So that remains, I think, if you say, all right, is Georgia going to go win the SEC championship? Are they going to be in the playoffs? Are they going to contend for a national championship? I come back and I say, the secondary for me has kind of replaced the offensive line. Big question.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And since you bring up the pass rush in connection with that, let's talk about that for a moment. As you wrote this week at DawgNation.com, Davin Bellamy does get his club off. Maybe that frees up his hand to kind of go out there and contribute to a Georgia pass rush that has really not been as involved lately as it seemed to be, like, say, the Notre Dame game earlier on the month of September. But you also kind of mentioned the schedule. You mentioned the Auburn game. I'll add to that the South Carolina game with Jake Bentley, who's a pretty good quarterback, and really even the Florida game because Felipe Franks is going to kind of stand back there, and he's certainly going to give you time to get to him if you can. He wants to throw the ball next week against Georgia. I mean, you look at 3 of Georgia's sort of remaining SEC games, they're all games in which you think the pass rush has an opportunity to make an impact and help out the secondary. It's just a matter of can it kind of get going enough to do that.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that also is maybe Trent Thompson being out. He doesn't swallow as many blocks on the, you've got John Atkins playing the nose, and then Thompson is next to him in most of these alignments. So the idea is Atkins swallows up one or two blocks in the middle, but then Thompson is kind of right next to him, and he's taking another guy. Well, that frees up the outside for Davin Bellamy or Lorenzo Carter or DeAndre Walker or even Walter Grant when he's out there. Well, with Thompson not out there, has that affected, or has there not been that much drop-off to, and Jonathan Ledbetter's still out there and is out there a lot of times when Thompson is, but you know what I mean? When if Thompson is not as much of a difference maker there on the line, not out there at all, that affects the outside pass rush. Well, maybe we'll see about that. But a lot of these things do have kind of a domino effect. I mean, that's a question. That's something they have to answer. But you also got to remember the Wolfpack, so to speak, hasn't really racked up many sacks over the last few years.
Yeah.
The Notre Dame game and the way they were affecting the quarterback early in the season was a little bit more the exception than the rule over the last few years. So we'll see. I mean, we thought early in the year they had finally turned the corner, and maybe Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy were about to have big breakout years, but they've kind of stumbled a bit here mid-season. We'll see how they finish.
So let me just follow up on that real quick, because, I mean, if you talk to the coaches, and they've said in the past, hey, you know, Carter and Bellamy are doing what we've asked them to do. And in the case of Carter in particular, Kirby Smart's raved about all the different things that he does, stuff that you've also written about, like playing the star and things like that. And some of the same stuff was also said about Floyd and Jenkins as well, you know, going back to the Jeremy Pruitt era. Is that just coach speak, or do you think that they really are okay with the contributions from these players without really getting a whole lot of sacks?
I think in years past it was they're doing more than the sack totals would indicate, but they could still do better. And the past couple weeks, the way Kirby put it after Tuesday's practice, the one time we got him this week, is he called it disruptions. Mm-hmm. As in that's how they gauge them, not just sacks, but you know, a quarterback pressure, or when Bellamy, you know, put his hand up and deflected that pass against Missouri, or just forced the quarterback to throw the ball sooner than he wanted. Kirby said the disruptions are not what they want them to be the last few weeks. So that's what they're looking to get. I mean, someone could not have a sack or even an official quarterback pressure all game, but have a really good game because of the quote-unquote disruption. I mean, what if what he does is Lorenzo Carter blitzes, doesn't get anywhere near the quarterback, but he forced the left tackle and the tailback to both peel off their man. The quarterback, you know, threw the ball sooner than he wanted, and it was an interception or a key third down incompletion. That's a disruption, and they haven't had enough of that lately, but they were having more of that early in the year.
Let me ask you about Jacob Eason for a moment, and I want you to tell me if you think that there is something to him not playing on Saturday. And I guess the way I want to frame this is, did he not play on Saturday because of what the game dictated, or because of what his practice performance during the week dictated, if you have to guess?
I mean, I haven't heard anything other than speculation that it was more than just what the game indicated. You know, obviously Kirby's public explanation was, and I was the one who asked him about it Tuesday, was that, you know, they were going to run the ball. They didn't want to just put him in there to just hand the ball off and everything. But and if you look at the Tennessee and Vanderbilt games, when he got in there, he did pass the ball. So they were trying to give him some passes, and maybe they just didn't want to relegate him to just handing the ball off late. So, you know, there's some validity to what he said, but I can't sit here and say with any certainty that, you know, something else didn't go into it, that maybe he didn't practice well enough or anything like that.
In your second glance piece 2 weeks ago, you wrote about him leaving the field against Vanderbilt, having the helmet on, maybe not the world's best body language. I heard some similar things about maybe how he left the field against Missouri on Saturday, although I'll admit I didn't see that with my own eyes. I mean, do you read anything into that, I mean, I guess if you don't play well, or if you take a sack and you're not playing a lot, I guess you have a right to maybe be disappointed. But, I mean, do you read anything into the body language that some people say they have seen from Eason?
I didn't notice him coming off the field after the Missouri game. I was on the field, but, you know, 85 guys.
Yeah.
He's among the tallest, but I didn't see him. I just observed that on the sidelines during the game, and I wrote about this in the second glance, the camera caught him on the phone, presumably with Jim Chaney, up in the press box talking, and he seemed pretty engaged, and, you know, perhaps a little more engaged. I just think overall, you know, look, this has got to be tough on him. He's 19 years old. He can be forgiven for, I'm not going to say he's sulking or whatever. I don't know. But he came in here expecting to start. He was expected to start this year. And quite frankly, what did Jacob Eason do to lose his job? Nothing, other than get hurt. The first 2 series he played of the season weren't great, but you could find a couple series that Jake Fromm struggled too. You have to dig, in the middle of games and whatever. What about the start of the Tennessee game? Jake Fromm didn't look good there. What about the interception against Missouri? What if he had gotten hurt then, and this is a few games, Jacob Eason comes in and he wins the job back. So in Jacob Eason's mind, it's not like he can sit here and say, I have no one to blame but myself. It's just got to be a frustrating thing, but it's one of those things where you really can't blame Kirby Smart for sticking with Jake Fromm. I mean, why would you make a change at this point? They're rolling. But he wants to keep Jacob Eason mentally involved because they might still need him. And it might be because of injury that they need him, or it might be because the offense stagnates and they say, you know what, we need the 6'5" rocket arm guy back in there. So they're going to do their best to keep him mentally involved.
If you don't mind, I want to squeeze in one quick final question. This couldn't be less important, but why did Georgia go for 2 against Missouri? I had some people send some messages to me about some various things that Missouri did during the game. Did Georgia go for 2 to spike the football against Missouri?
Kirby was asked about it afterwards, and he just said they were looking at the chart. I think there was like 10-plus minutes left, so it's somewhat understandable that you're looking at it and going, all right, they could score 4 touchdowns here in the last 10-plus minutes. So maybe, I don't know if something had happened that Kirby wasn't happy about it. I didn't hear much about, Missouri trash talking or taking cheap shots or anything that Kirby was mad at. I didn't see anything with the post-game handshake with Smart and Odom that would indicate anything had happened. It could just be one of those things of, football coaches think differently than the rest of us who are separated from it. And, in their minds, you can never be too sure. I would argue 27 points, 28 points, I'm not sure it makes too much of a difference. But in the heat of the game, these guys train themselves to look at that chart. And that chart, which in a lot of ways I think is ridiculous, just use common sense sometimes. Not even for this situation, but other times. But that chart says, at that point, go for 2. So make of it what you will.
Seth, it's always great to have you on DawgNation Daily. Hope you get to enjoy some family time here on the off day on Saturday, and we'll look forward to catching up with you next week, I imagine, from Jacksonville for you for the show, and we'll look forward to talking to you then.
All right, talk to you later.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff from Seth Emerson. We finished up that conversation by talking about the 2-point conversion that Georgia tried relatively early in the fourth quarter against Missouri, but the final score of the game. And Seth was kind of sharing his thoughts about the chart, the book, about which tells you go for 2 and which doesn't. Some of y'all follow the analytic stuff and the advanced stat stuff, and y'all know that the math people will tell you that you should essentially go for 2 every time anyway. That, the chances of securing a 2-point conversion are about 50-50. Therefore, if you never kicked the PAT and you went for 2 every single time, at the end of the season, you would essentially score the same number of points. So it's kind of funny how, a lot of times coaches treat a 2-point conversion as like a bridge too far, like the kind of thing that you only do when you absolutely have to. But if more teams went for 2 more often, more teams would score a lot more points. At least that's what the math sort of tells you about that. Before we transition here to our SEC Through, let me also remind you that we're getting ready for our DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville next Saturday. It's brought to you in part by our friends at Kroger. We'll be there for our DawgNation tailgate before the game. Kroger going to be giving out their game day essentials bags while supplies last. And something else that Kroger's doing this time of year is getting you ready for Halloween. Y'all got to understand. I got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. Halloween is just as big as Christmas in my household. And if it wasn't for Kroger, at the Kroger close to my house, there's this big giant section of Halloween stuff right there in the middle of the store. Candy and the toys and the decorations. Halloween is a very big deal if you have young kids, and Kroger takes good care of us for that. And by the way, if you need to get some Halloween candy and need to do it quickly, make sure you use the Kroger Click List. You can check out more details about that at Kroger.com. The Kroger Click List is the easiest, fastest, best way to get all the groceries that you need. We appreciate Kroger doing the Kroger Click List, and we appreciate them being a part of our DawgNation invasion to South Bend. All right, a few SEC stories I want to hit here. Let me start with this. Before the show, some of the people who work with me were giving me grief for bringing this up. But listen, I don't make up the news. I just talk about the news of what it is. Lane Kiffin has been connected to Tennessee here over the last 24 hours. I'm not telling you he's taking the job. I'm not telling you he's going there. I'm not even telling you he's going to officially be offered the job. All I'm telling you is there's a bunch of talk about Lane Kiffin in Tennessee right now. You had Chris Lowe, the ESPN writer, go on Jason Swain's radio program up in Knoxville saying that if he was offered the job, he would take it in a heartbeat. Well, we're not surprised by that necessarily. But what is sort of interesting is the degree to which Kiffin's kind of going to make this be known. He has tweeted a bunch about Tennessee lately. Tweeted about Terrence Cody's blocked field goal against Tennessee in the 2009 game, saying that should have been a penalty. Retweeted a bunch of people talking about Kiffin coming back to Tennessee. He followed a Twitter account the other day from someone whose account was essentially Kiffin for UT once again or something like that. I mean, listen, this guy knows how to cultivate attention on social media. You got to give him credit for that. And it just goes to show you that there's going to be a lot of interest in this Tennessee job when it does come available. Now, the bigger names on the list, the Kiffins, the John Grudens, I don't know if that's the way the Vols eventually go. My guess is, though, they probably will fire Butch Jones after Saturday's game against Alabama. I don't think they wanted to do that before the game. I don't think you wanted to be unfair to an interim coach, getting his career as an interim started off on such a bad note. But after Saturday, it may be the time to start talking about the next coach of Tennessee. We'll see where that goes. Now, a coach that was sort of on the hot seat like Butch Jones not that long ago has kind of seen his fortunes reversed here is Ed Orgeron. You know, we'll talk about this on AT&T SEC Country Live later on today, but did you see where Orgeron has his radio show last night? Now, he still does this like old-school call-in radio program. You couldn't call Kirby Smart and ask him a question on a radio show if Georgia won 15 consecutive national championships. That's just not what Georgia's going to do. But Orgeron sits there and just fields phone calls the same way Vince Dooley used to. It's a really old-school thing that LSU allows its coach to do with fans, and it's a great opportunity for fans. But a couple weeks ago, this guy called in and ripped Orgeron. You'll be happy to know he called back last night and apologized for having ripped Orgeron. Orgeron also on the radio show is talking about how he thinks pretty soon LSU is going to be competing with for championships. It is amazing how quickly all of this has changed for him, and really over the course of just a really couple short weeks. Another coach very much the same way in the SEC was Texas A&M coach Kevin Sumlin, who was also in some version of the hot seat before, may still be, but for now things are good. And while things are good, Sumlin's apparently not going to change anything. There are reports out there that even though Nick Starkel, the starter at quarterback for the Aggies at the beginning of the season, is working his way back to health, for now Texas A&M plans to stick with the freshman Kellen Mond, the quarterback who led them to the victory most recently against Florida last Saturday. I think that's probably a pretty good decision for someone to make. And the truth is, I think that Texas A&M's probably a pretty good team right now, and the victory against Florida last week is just the latest proof of that. Speaking of Florida, we'll close out with this. This is just sort of a question. What's Florida going to get out of its bye week right now? We know what Georgia's using it for. Getting ready for the Gators next Saturday. Terry Godwin's getting healthier. Trent Thompson's getting healthier. Kirby Smart will have you be known that they're not working on Florida right now. That apparently is not starting until next week. Right now, Georgia's just working on its own fundamentals, working on its own process and its own program. And as I said, some of that's about getting guys healthy, and some of that's about keeping the competition going. Florida, though, on the other hand, would seem to be obviously a team a little more in turmoil here. What's Florida using its bye week for? To kind of come up with a wrinkle, an unexpected play? Someone in the comment section a minute ago said he expects to see some trick plays from Florida on Saturday. Obviously, we won't know what's happening behind closed doors, but I still can't help but wonder how the Gators might be using their extra time to get ready for Georgia. One thing's true. I believe I trust the Georgia coaching staff to use this time wisely, maybe more than I trust Jim McElwain, Doug Nussmeier, and Randy Shannon down there in Gainesville. But we'll have to wait till next Saturday to know for sure. We'll make that your SEC through. And I will also remind you, no planning for the opponent this week because there is no opponent for Georgia, but make sure you check out planning for the opponent each and every week at DawgNation.com. It's brought to you by our friends at Georgia United Credit Union and Georgia United Credit Union's all-new unified checking account, which gives you all the comforts of a free checking account with the options to earn more. It's a simple, convenient, rewarding checking account that fits your lifestyle. Visit GUCU.org for the terms and conditions that apply to this account, federally insured by NCUA. All right, a couple things before we wrap up on today's show. In just a moment, I want to set the stage for Adam Anderson and his commitment announcement later on today. Will the four-star linebacker from Rome choose Georgia? We'll decide that in just a moment. Before that, though, I wanted to show you I thought a pretty cool compliment that some Georgia fans recently got from a baseball writer. Phil Rogers is a writer for MLB.com. He was, I guess, covering the NLCS between the Cubs and Dodgers last night. And supposedly he heard there were a lot of Dodgers fans in Wrigley Field. He said on Twitter, if you're watching on video, you'll see his tweet. He said there's said to be a lot of Dodger fans at Wrigley Field tonight, but they're not standing out by wearing Dodger blue. Phil then goes on to tweet about a group of fans that did stand out. He said, now those UGA fans at Wrigley the night before Georgia Notre Dame, those folks stood out, and then he gives you the hashtag Bulldog. So kind of nice that not a college football guy, not a guy connected to the state of Georgia, just a baseball writer, still remembering just how many Georgia fans took over Wrigley Field, how many Georgia fans eventually took over Notre Dame, and maybe we'll see a version of that next Saturday in Jacksonville as more Georgia fans take over that stadium and look to dominate away from Athens again against the Florida Gators. That would certainly be something nice to see. And in years ahead, when Georgia plays Florida, maybe one of the guys that will help the Dogs get those victories could be four-star linebacker Adam Anderson. He'll make his decision later on today, and as Jeff Sintel told us on Tuesday, it comes down to Georgia and Alabama for a guy that everybody in college football wanted at one point in time. Here's Jeff.
Nation's number 2 outside linebacker, probably going to be a 5-star when everybody re-racks him and sees him at the Army All-American game. He's about 6'4", about 220. If he ever gets into a big-time strength and conditioning program with the training table, he's going to look about 6'5" and about 255 and run like a gazelle. And he's going to pad a lot of sack totals at either Alabama or Georgia, that's for sure, in the coming years.
So here's my guess on this, and I'll admit this is something of just an educated guess. I think the answer for Anderson later on today is going to be Georgia. And I think it's going to give the appearance of it was Georgia all along. Ever since he decommitted from LSU, it was Georgia, 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 and he never wavered, never thought about anywhere else, and it was Dogs the whole way. I don't know that that's going to end up being true. I think he's going to pick Georgia. I think he's going to commit to Georgia today. I think he's going to be, as I told Jeff on Tuesday, a crucial member of Georgia's 2018 class. For me, if you want to put Fields and Sawyer as 1A, if you want to put Zamir White as 1B, I think the next most important recruit for Georgia may be Anderson. I think that the sack total he racked up against Justin Fields, we showed you those highlights on video a moment ago. I think that's a big example of that. This is going to be a huge get for Georgia. But one of the things that makes it big goes back to what I was just talking about before. The belief that maybe he was all Georgia all along. I know for a while, as recently as a couple weeks ago, it sounded like, based on some of the online chatter that you were seeing, that Alabama made a really strong push, really made Anderson a priority, and tried its best, but just wasn't able to come up with the commitment for Anderson, who stuck with the home state school and stuck with the University of Georgia. And that, for me, ends up being about the biggest part of this from a Georgia win standpoint. You'll celebrate Anderson as a player if he does commit today. I believe that he probably will. You celebrate Anderson as a player, but you also take notice that more and more often lately, Georgia has gone head-to-head over players that Alabama wanted, and it's Georgia that's coming away with that guy. It was true last year for Walter Grant and D'Angelo Gibbs. It's true this year for Adam Anderson. It was Justin Fields taking an official visit to Alabama, but the official visit did nothing to change Fields' mind. All of a sudden, Georgia has emerged as a real recruiting threat to Alabama, which means Georgia in the years ahead could be taking down Alabama on the field also. All right, as we wrap up DawgNation Daily today here on this Thursday, speaking of Zamir White, let me close out with this, a invitation of sorts to check out Cy Brown's piece at DawgNation.com today. He's got a really funny video. I think we're going to actually play this today on AT&T SEC Country Live this afternoon. So White's going for a touchdown, and his shoe comes off. And you can see this video on DawgNation.com. The opposing defender who's just reaching and grabbing for White and coming up with nothing, coming up with air. White has been so hard to bring down in his high school football games this season. Well, the defender who's sort of just left helpless takes his shoe, Zamir White's shoe, and just throws it off the field. And White had a perfect response back to that on Twitter. It's a terrific exchange, really funny stuff. Cy Brown's got that for you at DawgNation.com right now. We'll also have it for you in AT&T SEC Country Live this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the DawgNation Facebook page. We're back again tomorrow. We'll talk Adam Anderson and see you then right here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you who are with us right now, we'll take some comments from you also, and I will go ahead and warn you, excuse me as I scratch my nose, but so the time we're supposed to be off the air is at 11 a.m. Eastern Time each and every day. I generally try to give a little extra time for the comments, but I've been screamed at today to get off at 11 a.m., so we will try to abide by that and get off on time here, but that still gives us about 15 minutes to kind of fly through a bunch of stuff. One of the most common questions I'm seeing right now, Lance Copeland, Nager Yang, a lot of folks asking about Adam Anderson, about what time it's supposed to be. All I know is it's supposed to be in the afternoon. I don't I don't know anything more specific than that. I'm not really even sure about the circumstances of it, but it's supposed to be in the afternoon, I believe. But it's not a morning type of thing. That was the first thing I wanted to know was, hey, is this going to be during the window of DawgNation Daily? But it's like an afternoon thing, so it'll come out later on today. But the important thing is what the news is going to be, and I believe it's going to be good news for Georgia. Let me see if I can scroll down here and get a few of the earlier comments, too, and we'll kind of launch into this. Hank Watson, off the top of the show, we talked about how to prepare for the Florida game. Hank says this game is personal for anyone who's played for or grown up watching the Dog, so Kirby's intensity will come out without him having to say a word to any of the team. Hank, I think that may be a pretty good point. And I think that there's something about what you said that's also important to mention here as well. I don't expect Kirby Smart to tell us everything he personally believes. Now, at some point in time, I'm going to play you audio on one of these shows. I'll probably do it Monday, maybe, of what Kirby Smart said about the Florida rivalry last year. And it is exactly the opposite of what I want my coach to say. It just is. It's just exactly the opposite. He says it's a game just like any other. All the SEC East games are big. Georgia's got a lot of rivals. And, for me, who spent a year trying to talk up the Georgia-Florida game, that's not what I want my coach to say. But if that's what he feels like he needs to say publicly and behind the scenes, he's like, boy, I hate what happened to me when I played against Florida. I hate the fact that I lost this game last year to a Florida team that really was not that much better than average, even though it won the East. If he took that sort of demeanor privately, he can say whatever he wants to publicly. And Hank, you're right. And that's one of the things that's great about having a Georgia alumnus as coach. Not that all Georgia alumni would be better options as coaches than anybody else, but in this particular case, a guy who does, use intensity and passion as fuel to play good football. Kirby having that sort of intensity and passion as a Georgia lifer, that's a pretty nice thing to think about. Really good stuff, Hank. Appreciate that. Kevin Mills says, so far as big-time recruiting in the SEC, it seems like it's all Georgia and Alabama since Kirby took over. Yeah, I mean, the distance between Kirby Smart and most other SEC teams in terms of recruiting right now is vast. Even programs that you think of as pretty good recruiters, like LSU, for instance, LSU's going to sign another good class in 2018, did really well working like the transfer wire back during the offseason for guys who will be eligible in 2018. LSU's going to have a talented roster next season, but there's even a gap between Georgia and LSU. I mean, just look at quarterback. I mean, LSU can't sign a quarterback. Georgia signed 3 5-stars in a row. So that's one example, or I shouldn't say signed 3. They have received commitments from 3 and hope to sign a third here, and will sign a third here in a couple of months. But that just gives you an idea of how even an LSU team, a fixture in the top 5, normally Georgia's even put a gap between themselves and the Tigers, and to say nothing of Florida and Tennessee, which cannot keep pace at all. And, the mainstream media will tell you, well, Tennessee's still ranked above Georgia in the recruiting rankings. Y'all follow this stuff closely to know that the kids that show up on the online stuff for Tennessee aren't sticking with Tennessee. And as Jeff told you on Tuesday, you may have, what was it, like 8 of the 10, top recruits that Georgia signed this year that not even in the class yet. That, what looks like some of Georgia's better signees, better commits right now, may actually rank near the bottom of overall, scouting ranking by the time the class is done. I mean, now, we'll see if Matt Corral, the Florida quarterback commit for 2018, we'll see if he has some legs. We'll see if he has some coattails to bring some guys into that program with him. But for right now, the gap between Georgia and the rest of the SEC, other than Alabama, which is for the moment still Alabama, it is vast. A lot of y'all mentioning the fact that Justin Fields on TV tomorrow night. Is that right, Michael William Wilkes and Joshua Campbell? I'm seeing ESPN, ESPN2 at 7:30. Either way, that should be side by side on your channel guide there. But watching Fields tomorrow night should be interesting. I know that I guess a lot of our folks are also planning on going there as well, maybe. I don't know if Jeff's planning on being there or not, but I've heard from some folks who are kind of planning on maybe going to that game, and on TV should be a lot of fun too. It's Dalton, right? It's Dalton that Harrison plays, I believe. Nikki Hester says, guess I'll have to watch the Bama games this weekend. Nikki, I'm actually looking forward to the TV this weekend. Now, I'm going to have to do some family stuff. I can't be all football all the time, given the fact that that's what the normal Saturdays are kind of like this time of year, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But I'll spend some family time during the day, but I'm hoping to get in front of a TV for some of those national games. Michigan-Penn State's a pretty good game for a Georgia bye week. Notre Dame, USC, that's a pretty good game for Georgia bye week. I'm sure a lot of Dog fans probably root for Notre Dame to keep winning and keep making Georgia look good. But even apart from the potential selfish interest, those are two pretty good games. Alabama, Tennessee, I'll watch that. Even if it's going to be a blowout, there may just be some nastiness to pay attention to here. And actually, I'm also like the world's biggest SEC homer. Y'all should know that. But I think Auburn, Arkansas is better than you realize. Arkansas is not a good team, but Arkansas hates Auburn. Arkansas hates Auburn. Those Arkansas people can't stand Malzahn. Malzahn was their version of, well, I'm not going to start naming coaches' names, but the high school coach who really was impressed with himself, at least according to some folks in Arkansas. There are a lot of Arkansas folks who do not like Gus Malzahn, and Malzahn being at Auburn only intensifies that a little bit more. So Auburn, Arkansas is a better rivalry than you may think. LSU, Ole Miss is a better rivalry than you think. LSU is also a little, what does people say sometimes? They're feeling themselves a little bit right now. I don't think Ole Miss is good enough to win that game, but keep it close. I actually kind of like Ole Miss maybe keep that one close a little bit on Saturday. Sean Schooler says, Kirby tells us what he wants us to hear, and his team different, same as Coach Rick. He looked holy on TV in the locker room. He'd cuss you out. Well, I don't know about that about Rick. I don't know if that was true or not, but the idea that Kirby's message publicly and privately are two different things, that's probably true, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem. All right, y'all. Okay, I'm sorry, y'all. I apologize. I'm getting screamed at here. So Harrison Dalton is tonight. I did not know that. Thank y'all very much. Sorry about that. Alan Verbanchik says Florida's working with the bail bondsman during the bye week. That may be true, although I don't think it's going to do much good for those 9 suspended players. It sounds like they are not going to be available. Sorry for getting that wrong on the Harrison thing. I got to start paying more attention to stuff like that. Travis Griffin said that he's home of the Dalton Catamounts. So I used to do high school football games on CSS years ago. Y'all remember the old TV network CSS? And we would do a game in Dalton every year because Carpets of Dalton, or whatever that company's called, Dalton Carpets, was one of like the big sponsors. And so we would go up and do a game at Dalton every year. I hate to sort of like pull back the curtain, but that's why I went to Dalton, because Carpets of Dalton was a huge sponsor. And it was always great. Like, Dalton is one of the great high school football towns in America. I mean, just a terrific following. City systems, and I think Dalton is a city system. City systems just produce really good fan bases, really good, support. Kind of like Gainesville. Carrollton's a city system. Dalton, I believe, is a city system. I think Valdosta is a city system. These systems that have just the one school, even like the counties that have just the one high school. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. I apologize. They just create really good atmospheres for high school football. It's one of the reasons why you see coaches migrate a lot of times to. They leave the big counties. They go to either the cities or the counties that have just the one school in the system. And Dalton's an example of that. They just have a terrific support for high school football up there. It's almost in Chattanooga. I mean, you barely are in the state when you get up there, but Dalton is a great place for high school football, and I'm sorry for getting the night of the game wrong, but thank you all for correcting me. Yeah, Philip Jordan Wells puts the frowning emoji, says that's going to be my face when I try to watch Fields on TV tomorrow night. That is very true, Philip, but that wouldn't be the first time I've gotten something like that wrong. Randy Hall says, who will commit after Adam Anderson? I love the fact that the hay is not even in the proverbial barn yet on Adam Anderson. We've already moved on to the next guy, but that is the nature of Georgia fans for sure, and I'm right there with you on that. Julie Craig, let me read this comment. Julie says, I'm going to watch Missouri. I want to see if they play dirty against all their opponents, or do they feel like that was their only chance against us? So y'all help me out on this, because some of y'all sent some of this stuff to me on Twitter. Was there something going on between Georgia and Missouri on Saturday night? Because I definitely heard some booing in the stands. Georgia going for 2 in the fourth quarter seemed a little weird. Julie right there talking about dirty play. Was there some of that going on in that game on Saturday? Because it's sort of, I don't know. This seems to be the kind of thing that fans are talking about, but I haven't really heard anybody else say anything. And when Sony Michel knocked that guy into the middle of next week, the Missouri player, he certainly stood up and let him know about it very quickly. And Sony's like the nicest guy in the world. I mean, he's not, to my knowledge, some like big trash talker normally. It almost seemed like he had a little something on his mind when he did that. And as Seth pointed out in his second glance piece, he also knocked somebody else into the stands as well. But on that one in particular, when the guy got, unfortunately taken off the field, I mean, Sony stood up and let him hear about it right away. It seemed like there might be something going on with that on Saturday. Junior Baker shouting out Comcast Sports South. Junior, I appreciate you remembering the network. I had a good time there. One of the guys that has worked with us, Jim, also worked at Comcast Sports South, so a lot of alumni of CSS still around here. Alan Verbanchik says, I expect the Anderson commitment coming out tonight. Maybe that is the case. How are we doing on time here? All right, I got 5 minutes. We can fly through these. Jimmy Barnes says Otis Reese next. Boy, that'd be an interesting thing. The linebacker, currently a Michigan commit. A lot of chatter about him as of late. I don't know if he's next, but a lot of folks feeling like he could be on his way. Armand Rashad thinking about that Lowndes-Valdosta rivalry, intense, just like Florida-Georgia, or I should say Georgia-Florida. Excuse me. What's wrong with me? Randy Hall says, I want KJ Henry after Adam Anderson. Yeah, Jeff gave me some grief about that on Tuesday, that the paint won't even be dry on Adam Anderson's commitment. I'm already moving on to KJ Henry. But listen, that's the one spot where you got to be greedy. Actually, there are probably a few of those, but you got to compile these pass rushers. You don't get a pass rush in college because you find the next Lawrence Taylor. You get a pass rush in college because you bring in so many bodies that you can kind of just send them in waves over the course of a game. Alabama's doing that right now with Rashaan Evans and some of the others. That's what Georgia's got to do too. That is one of those deals. Philip Jordan Wells asking, why is Lowndes visible from 75, but you can't see Valdosta? Both are in the city limits. So it's funny you would say that, because when I was a kid, we used to go to Daytona Beach every year for vacation. And that was one of the things I always look forward to, because for me it meant you were getting a little closer to Florida, is when you go by that Lowndes Stadium, home of the Vikings, right there off 75. I definitely remember seeing that a lot growing up. Easy Brown says, horse collar on DeAndre Swift. Ref looked at him and reached for the flag and still didn't throw it. Yeah, some people were bothered by that too. It was funny. For 3/4 of Georgia-Missouri, it was relatively drama-free in terms of the final score. Even when it was still relatively close, it looked like Georgia was going to pull away. But, man, there was some chippiness in that game, at least on the part of Georgia fans. They were kind of bothered, it seems like, and that's another example of something that may have bothered folks. Your Saul brings up a big topic. Biggest rivalry in the States, not Lowndes-Valdosta. He says it's Warner Robins and Northside. And I guess Fromm's brother left Houston County, and he's at one of those two schools now. I forget if it's Northside or WR, but he's at one of those places now. And I know that the folks down there have always talked about what a big rivalry that is. I've never had a chance to see that one in person, but man, ton of fun. This is not a great rivalry necessarily because they haven't been in the region for all that long. But I had a chance to be at a Camden Colquitt game a few years ago, like 11,000 people in the stands. That was a terrific atmosphere. It's one of the few high school football games I've ever been to that when the home team, in this case was Camden, when they were on defense and the crowd started making noise, it sounded like a loud stadium. You know what I'm talking about? It's like the crowd making noise sounded like the same way it would at a college football game. It was a really, really cool environment and incredible stuff. Tyler Herring talking about those Tucker Tigers. Tyler, appreciate you checking in on that. And by the way, Tyler, thanks also for sharing something for our Gatorator countdown as well. We gave you a shout-out on the program a little earlier today, Tyler. We appreciate you doing that. Jimmy Barnes also referencing the hit where Godwin got hurt was a guy flying in late and hitting the pile. Okay. Jimmy, I did not quite see that. I've got the game on DVR. I haven't had a chance to watch it late. Drew Stevens says he's tuning in late, but we played against Fromm's brother a few weeks ago. Okay, Drew, thanks for updating us on that. I appreciate that. Matthew McGay, he's saying there were a lot of penalties with no flags against Missouri. A lot of folks kind of weighing in on kind of a similar thing. Philip Carroll says, who was the last freshman quarterback to throw for 300-plus yards in a game? I would imagine that Zaire did it as a true freshman. Did David Green do it as a redshirt freshman? I don't did Stafford do that in 2006? That's a pretty good question. Ricky Shane, Roland Roro weighing in about being from the class of 1995 from Northside. I'm a high school graduate from 1995 as well, Ricky, so I appreciate you weighing in on that. Boy, a lot of folks from Warner Robins in this comment section today. I guess well representing DawgNation down in Warner Robins. Mike Jackson says, play grown man football against Florida. Easy to win if we do. That's a great spot to finish off our comments today. Sorry if I didn't get a chance to answer all of yours. I got to get off the air on time today. They're screaming at me to make sure that I do that. We'll try to see if we can do a little extra time tomorrow, though, to kind of go off in the weekend style. Thanks for being with us here today. Hope you'll be able to see us again tomorrow at 10 a.m., and then we'll be 3 p.m. today, Eastern Time, on the SEC Country Facebook page for AT&T SEC Country Live. Always love seeing friendly Georgia faces there in that comment section. And we'll look forward to talking to you then. And then, as I said again, tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you missed any portion of our show, though, we'll post the audio version of the show momentarily at DawgNation.com, or as I like to call it, the world-famous DawgNation.com, iTunes, and SoundCloud. And, of course, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Y'all have a great day.